Thank you, Tor. Yeah, so I was awarded the Novo Nordisk Foundation Research Award Postdoc grant back in 2017. And back when I was awarded it, the grants that I was looking at, this was definitely one of the more favorable ones to get. The grant itself is very broad. It's both within bioscience and basic biomedicine. And right now, the next call closes in January 2024. With this grant, you will be connected to a Danish research institution, and it's a total of 4 years, where you should do minimum 3 years abroad. This makes it better for you in a way that you can keep your connection to Denmark and have a foot in the door to get back in. And also, this grant not only provides salary, but also lab expenses. So it's a total of 4 million over the course of 4 years, so 1 million per year. So who's eligible for it? Well, first of all, you would have to want to at least carry out research abroad for 3 years. And through my experience, what I've seen from others in the past, they are pretty strict on that timeline because they really want you to go abroad for a certain amount of years. And then who can then get it? Well, it's also pretty flexible in that range. You can still be finishing your PhD as long as you finish before the start date, or you can have had your PhD for up to 5 years. You can also already have gone abroad and started a postdoc, as long as it's only for 1 year. And then finally, you need to find this connection with a foreign research institution and have their support to go stay there. And finally, have already a connection in the Danish research community. So if you not already have that, that's necessary before. Now, there is a very thorough PDF on how to fill out the application, where you can look into what they put weight on. And I'm also happy to ask questions about that, but instead I will try and focus on other stuff that it doesn't say. So first, I just wanted to briefly touch upon my path so far, so you know how things went down for me. Tora already nicely presented my start, where I did my PhD in Professor Tu Schwartz lab. And during that PhD, I had 6 months abroad, where I ended up at Columbia University through one of Tu's former collaborators. And then I went back, finished my PhD, and finished my papers. And then I made the decision to go back to Columbia and started looking for grants. And that's where I got awarded the NNF grant and went there for 4 years. And I ended up staying there for an additional year. And from there on, I actually ended up staying in New York, where I'm now a staff scientist at the New York Genome Center. So how to start? Well, first off, it's making the decision. And I think since you're here, you probably already have made it, or at least you're thinking of it very strongly. And I would say go for it. You don't need to be 100% sure. I was not. So next question is, where am I going? That can rely on a lot of different factors, and that depends on what's important to you. It can be a certain experimental design that you would like to have, or a certain project. It can be the research environment you want to learn from, or a specific PI. And location can also be important for you. But one thing to know is you don't need to know your project specific in advance before you make this decision. In my case, my co-PI, I was in that fortunate situation that I had actually already established contact at Columbia, where I stayed during my PhD. And I wrote back to him and asked if he was willing to have me back. And fortunate enough, he said yes. And then we started looking for applications. I actually ended up doing 3 applications. The first 2 you heard of from last week, Marie Curie and EMBO. In those 2, I was doing a project where it was focused on what he worked on, which was mu-opioid receptors and antidepressant effects on them. And I think it was a very interesting project. Unfortunately, it didn't get funded for either of these cases. We did get this emblem of excellence from Marie Curie, so I guess it's saying like you're good but close but not close enough. But I think it was a decent project, or actually a very good one. But then when the NNF came and we looked into that, now we had to have the combination with a Danish research institution. So again, my PI during my PhD, he was present in the Center for Basic Metabolic Research, and the Novo Nordisk Foundation is, we thought that it would be good to put it in a more metabolism-oriented project. And from this, we actually ended up using preliminary data from my stay abroad when I was there during my PhD. And just briefly to science figures here from that preliminary data. I was working with 3 fatty acid receptors, and they're receptors that are present on the surface of membrane, and that would normally look like this in a confocal microscope with the fluorescent tag. But for one of the receptors, we saw that it clumped a lot intracellularly. So we were interested in knowing what was this. I further did some tests on it where we looked at different intracellular organelle markers. And this receptor, free fatty acid receptor 1, turned out to be highly expressed or co-localized to the outer mitochondrial membrane. The mitochondria is the energy house of the cell and is important for metabolism. So it seemed like an obvious good project to use there. So that ended up being my project I wrote about. I don't know how important the preliminary data has been in this, but I think this specific project that I decided to work with an NNF with seemed really a good fit, I would say. And that's how I got there. But how do you find your PIs? And here, I think first off, if you want to like choose your research area, and a postdoc is also a good time if you're thinking of switching, because especially with this grant, you have 4 years, so that gives you a lot of leeway as well. But again, this is your network. I got mine with my current PI that I had during my PhD, and that's also something I've seen for others. In other cases, they have also found the one they wanted to go work with first, and then from there found a good fit in Denmark. Besides that, I've also, in terms of the international PI, as I said, network, maybe your network, your mentor's network. It could be through a lot of different ways, but also I've seen it through conferences directly from an interaction or a poster session. So there's a lot of ways to do it. You can also directly reach out. In terms of reaching out, I will say that in my current job, we get a lot of emails from people who want to come do a postdoc with us, but none of them mention that I want to apply for this grant or this grant and come if you come with your own funding, that makes you a lot more attractable and visible. Then what about when you found someone that you would be interested to go work with? Then I think it's important also to look for red flags. It's important to look at the research environment that you will be working in, if it's possible to meet the team, especially without the PI, to know like what's the research environment like, what are the expectations. You are a little bit special here because you come with your grant and you are actually hired from Denmark, so you're on Danish vacation. So you have more vacation days also. But so that's important if they're very rigid about like how much time they want people to spend in the lab. I already knew mine in advance, so that was key for me. Then also look at publication rate. Do they publish a lot? Is there a lot of authors on? Do they collaborate? A lot of these things can be important to check when you make that decision. Then from there, writing the application itself. As I mentioned, you can find a lot of information in there. It's pretty straightforward. I will say a little bit about the budget and also personal finances abroad. As I mentioned, you have a lot of independence and freedom. You can allocate in the budget both for salary, but then for operating expenses, relocation, computer and software, if you want to go to conferences, and other research lab visits. If you, for instance, want to learn a technique from some other lab, they will can help facilitate that to some extent. So there I see it as a very good grant. You also have the flexibility in terms of you can do a 10% change in the budget from year to year without having to write and ask for a new budget breakdown. And then I also just want to mention on a personal level in the US, the first 3 years are tax-free as a postdoc, and I don't know how it is in other countries. And one other thing is in the US that you have a cap in the budget for 60,000 krona that you can use for healthcare. This is not enough in the US, but normally what I've seen happen, and also for me, your institute, your international institute will help you cover the rest. So my stay at Columbia, how did that go? Well, I worked on multiple projects, and that happens. I also, besides working on my own, where we ended up with one publication from that. I also worked on we made a signaling assay where we got a patent from it, and it was licensed through a company, and also we got a paper out on that. So there is lots of opportunities that happens when you go to a new research environment. And then what about the fourth year back? Well, in my case, that was the 2020 pandemic, and I ended up staying in the US. And also, due to the pandemic, I actually ended up staying for another year where I got a 1-year no-cost extension. This is something that was also possible to do. The no-cost extension means that you can't get more money, but you can then, if you have money left, you can relocate them and send in a new budget for that period. But it's up to a year it was possible. In my case, it ended up having to be shorter because that was the rules from the Faculty of Health of Science, which I was connected to in Denmark. So that's also something to pay attention to. Where am I now? Well, as I mentioned, I'm at the New York Genome Center as a staff scientist, and it's a nonprofit science organization. It means there are labs there, and they're connected to other universities or to universities. In my case, I'm connected to Columbia University, and now I work with the neurodegenerative diseases, where we work with postmortem tissue and spatial transcriptomics. We are also interested in postdocs, so if any of you would be interested in that, please contact me, or if you want me to help finding contacts in New York, I can also try help facilitate there. Then finally, I just want to touch on why should you do it? Well, it's an opportunity to learn from the best in the world. You really have a strong golden ticket if you are coming in and saying that you want to create funding for yourself. I want to keep it to that. And then it looks good on your CV. Will help you further in your career. And it's an experience. There's a lot to experience in terms of I learned a lot, both research-wise, but also learning about yourself. And then take-home messages. This brand is very flexible in many ways, which makes it very attractable, I think. Then it's just about making the decision, which I think most of you have. Finding the right PI, I think, is important. And checking out the research environment before you go. I also think one thing I didn't touch too much upon is your PI invested in your project. As you understand, I also started working on other projects. And it's just to be aware if this is something you want to really focus on with them over there because you want to learn with them, or if it's something you want to take back and think about that for your future. And then in general, just have mentors. And I can also say thank you to Tor and Gretchen in that respect that I have reached out to sometimes. And I think that was it for me. And I'm happy to ask any question. There are no stupid questions in my world. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maria. Really, really interesting journey you have had. So while you're thinking about some questions you can raise to Maria, I can start by asking into your funding. So it seems quite favorable, the funding in this grant. What about if you were a family? Will they also provide funding, the extra funding that will be if you have to bring your wife or your kids and kindergarten, or that is not? Will that be a restriction?
Yeah, no, there is there is extra 60,000 kroner per year if you come with a family. And I think another thing also to take into account that with so besides that, you can also normally you pay your pension into Denmark, but because you're abroad for those 3 years, you actually write into tax and you get them out instead. There's something with tax where you then can put them in when you come back. And I don't know I can't remember how that worked, but the fact that you take them out is also possible for you to use those money if necessary, if you come as a family. So
Okay.
that's an extra.
Yeah.
So both the 60,000 and the pension is possible.
So the floor is open. Anyone who has any question for Maria? Yes.
Thank you, Maria, for your nice presentation. You mentioned that it's quite flexible, this grant, and I was wondering if is it possible that another way around, instead of spend 3 years out, if it can be 3 years in Denmark and 1 year abroad. Is it possible or not? I didn't get to that point.
Yeah, and that's actually like this grant, they're very rigid about the time being spent out. So they really want you to stay 3 years. And since I applied to now, they have actually changed the wording from when I applied, it was 3 year out and then the last year back. And I applied to ask, can I stay longer? But now they have changed it into at least 3 years abroad. So I don't think it would be possible to do less.
So you can also raise the question in the chat, but Gretchen, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much, Maria. That was a really, really nice talk and a really great description of your experience. One of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking is kind of what makes you special. Why do you think you got this and others who have applied didn't? Was there something about what you did or your setup that you think was this sort of sweet success part?
I think that definitely, I think that one thing is that it was Columbia University that always helps to get stamps from well-renowned universities. And my PI over there was also a strong old-timer with a very beautiful track record. Mm-hmm. And the fact there were so many, like, it kind of really fell into place for me. Yeah. That I also had been there before. I had preliminary data. But I can just, from the experience I then have had with others who have searched as applied as well, some of them, they've come with their own idea for what project they wanted to do within, and found their PI, and from there also found another PI that would work with them in Denmark. So it's not a given, but I really think they really want to see how you can connect the two universities as well, because for me, the fact that it was within the free fatty acid receptors, the metabolism part, the receptors, the tool work done, but using his technology, that was, I think, really how it came together.
Yeah, I can see that red line in there,
Yeah.
in the background to it.
Hey, can I raise another question if I don't see anyone in the chat? So Maria, you are a researcher within basic research, but what if you were a clinician? Could you also have a grant?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure actually, because I mean, according to the eligibility, I can't say that right now, but you know what I mean. It doesn't say anything about that, but the research grant is within basic research, so you would have to go that path. So I would think that would be kind of hard if you want to stay within being, I don't know, depending on the project, I would say.
Okay, just the last question I have before we end up with you, Maria. You talked about the publication, and you have to, and before you will look at the publication rate. But what happened while you were there? Was it just as easy as it is in Denmark, and I think it is, to be either first or last? Also, is there a different culture about you as a researcher going into a group, and then there's some kind of a list you have to follow, so you will not end up in the end or in the beginning of the author list?
I think that that really depends on the PI you go to or the lab you go to, how they do it. And yeah, I hear drama stories from other places, but in my case, I think it was very similar to Denmark.
So it just will be about having the agreement on beforehand, and then
yeah, you should do that, right?
Okay. Okay, no questions raised then. Maria, thank you a lot for sharing your story, and now we will look into another successful postdoc who have obtained a grant from a national funding source. And it is Daniel Ibsen. And if you go to LinkedIn, you will see that Daniel Ibsen is quite a busy man. He is affiliated with, I counted 4 research institutions. We have the University of Cambridge. We have the STEAM Diabetes Center, Aarhus. We have the Aarhus Department of Public Health. And then we have the Department of Nutrition, Sports and Exercise, the University of Copenhagen. So Daniel, you obtained your PhD in 2017. We were focusing on the association between the intake of dietary sources of saturated fat, dairy, and meat products in the development of type 2 diabetes. And then you was awarded not just one postdoc grant in 2022, but 2. You have to decide which one you would have, and then you took the one from the Independent Research Foundation. So Daniel, please give us your experiences with this grant.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Tor. And actually, I was done with my PhD in 2020. I started in 2017.
Sorry, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so it's just so people know. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen here, hopefully. And yes, I will talk about this Independent Research Fund Denmark International Postdoc Grant, and it has some similarities to what Maria talked about, but there are also some big differences. Yes, and that's true that I'm working 4 different places in this project. So in sort of Maria, she's finished and she's doing a very cool other thing in New York now, but I'm actually sort of in the end of this postdoc project now. So I'm actually still working on this project. Yes. Okay, but I will start a little bit with my journey sort of leading up to this grant, just so you have a little bit of background. So I did a Master of Science in Human Nutrition at the University of Copenhagen, actually at the Department of Nutrition, Sports and Exercise. Then I went to Aarhus University to do a PhD in nutritional epidemiology. And then when I finished my PhD, I very soon after started like this 1-year postdoc at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm in Sweden, but that was during the pandemic. So I actually ended up never going to Sweden, but having to stay home in Denmark. And that first year of postdoc was a project that was, well, the short story is that I met this professor at Karolinska at another PhD student's their sort of defense, and I talked to her and she said, well, send me your CV, you sound interesting. And then while sort of finishing my PhD, she wrote back, well, are you interested in doing a postdoc? And I said, yes. And she said, well, I have funding for 1 year and maybe 1 more year. And this maybe I was sort of a little bit, well, then I have to look for something else. So while doing that postdoc at Karolinska, I was sort of really thinking, well, what do I do then? And actually that's sort of before you, maybe some of you are sort of already postdocs, but maybe some of you are sort of the end of your PhD, but sort of when you start sort of this after life after doing this defense. I think one thing I spent a lot of time on actually was thinking about what I wanted with my research. So I sort of tried to make a plan of what I wanted to do, and that is sort of leading into the grant and what you should apply for. And during my PhD and a little bit after, then I was very interested in sort of diet and population and planetary health, but I've done some projects on that already. Then during my 1 year of postdoc at Karolinska, I learned more about causal inference methods and how to do this target trial emulation, which was a new interesting method that I think is very useful. But there was something sort of in my field in nutrition research that I think that's always sort of a big limitation, and that is that much of this research that's focused on self-reported data. But it would be really nice to have something more objective, so measure diet objectively. So that was sort of this major limitation in the research and this big gap and this big challenge that people are working on. And one thing that I really wanted to learn more about. I also sort of became more sort of, or I actually wanted to work more. I worked with diabetes in my PhD, but I wanted to work more out at the Steno Diabetes Center in Aarhus and sort of work even more with patients with diabetes. So that was also sort of a core element, sort of what I wanted to do in the end. So putting sort of these things, that was sort of the background for me thinking, so what kind of project would I need to do? This is the project, and I will get more into the actual grant in just a minute, but just so you know, so what is this project about? Well, it's called Light the Way, using metabolomics in nutritional epidemiology to understand the causal role of diet in prevention of type 2 diabetes. And this is essentially have like two components to this project. So one is looking at these metabolites as intermediates. So you eat a diet, you consume some food, and that will impact your sort of your metabolites, which, depending if it's a good or bad diet, will maybe change your risk of type 2 diabetes. So the first part is sort of identifying markers that were related to the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. The other part is more addressing this, well, how do we measure diet objectively, and how do we do that in people with type 2 diabetes? So that I sort of framed the idea of doing a pilot study to sort of build a framework for how we could objectively assess not just what you ate yesterday, but more the long-term dietary pattern. So that was sort of the two parts of this study. But let's talk about the international postdoc grant, and then we can sort of link the project together and how it actually fits in. Because as Maria's project as well, this is, as it says, it's an international postdoc grant, and it's a 2-year grant, but you have to have at least 1 year abroad. And again, they are very strict about this, going abroad for at least 1 year. The grant, it's a little bit different in the way that it focuses a lot on improving your skills as an early career researcher. So at least when I sort of applied, it was like you had to have it has to be maximum 3 years sort of within doing your PhD. So it is in the early stages after your PhD, because it's thought of as a way you can, as an opportunity for you to sort of also learn something new. And the next part is also growing more independent as a researcher. So you're doing a PhD, you have a PI, then you go into a postdoc and you also have a PI, but during this period you will sort of transition into being more independent. And this is also sort of, this grant should help you do that. When you get if you get the grant, I think it's important to say that it's actually a personal grant. So it means that you will get all the money yourself. You don't necessarily have to be employed by any of these different institutions. You have your grant and you can take it wherever you want to go. It also gives money for traveling, so for family as well. And I think that's also a really, really nice thing. And then the final thing with this postdoc is, well, that's more general with this independent research fund, is that it has to be something that improves Danish research, and it has to be focused a little bit more on new ideas and not just like, old ones, things that have been done, and you give them a little bit of a twist and that's it. So I have to be a little bit new. And for me, this grant fit very well into where I was in my career, just finished sort of my PhD, was in the middle of doing this shorter postdoc and thinking about what are the skills that I want to learn going forward. Yes. So how to sort of put those pieces together with actually what I wanted to do and sort of how this grant could help me. So during my PhD, I was 1 year in Cambridge working with a supervisor over there. And actually, they had also, that was not the project I was part on, but they work also on metabolites and diet and development of diabetes. So that was a very natural fit for actually doing the first part of my project, because they had the data and they had some experience using the data, but I had some ideas for some new methods we could use to analyze that data. So that was like the sort of the first part and the international part of my stay. So that was sort of one of the first pieces coming together. Then, as I said, I was focused on learning new methods, but methods that, when sort of used and applied and we understand them, and especially sort of setting up this new way of measuring diet in bigger cohort studies, well, that is something that could improve the research a lot in Denmark. So in that way, that also sort of fit that criteria. So with this grant, well, you go abroad and you work with someone, but you are more or less your own boss. At least that's very much the project, because I sort of had the idea and I said to my previous supervisor in Cambridge, well, I have this idea. I want to get funding so I can come and work with you. And she was very fine with that, but she acted more like a mentor, because she was not my boss in particular. I was like, I had my own project and she was helping me with it, but it was not her own thing. So she couldn't say that I had to do one thing or another. She was sort of only supervising me for that. And actually the same thing for now. So I'm in the sort of second year of this 2-year project, and now I'm back in Denmark. I'm sort of being back and forth between Aarhus and Copenhagen. And in Copenhagen, that's where I run this pilot study. And again, it's sort of my own little study. So I have sort of more control of everything. But that's really nice as well, because you learn to be more and more independent. But it also means that there's some additional sort of pressure, right? You have to take more responsibility of everything, and you sort of have to figure out more or less many of the things yourself. So that's both really good, but it also puts a little bit more pressure on. And then again, I'm administering the grant myself, and that takes a lot of time. I just have to be honest about that. But I could take my family with me. So for my situation in being going to Cambridge, where I had my wife and 2 kids with me for the first 6 months, and then the last 6 months they had to go back to Denmark because my daughter had to start school there. But having them, the possibility to have them with me was really, 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 really nice. Yes. And then what about this improving research? Well, what is nice about this project and why I think they decided to fund me and the project? Well, it's because it sort of addresses some more fundamental research questions, and sort of solves this fundamental problem. It's also sort of looking a little bit ahead to the future, for instance, doing this pilot study of sort of trying something a little bit new and figuring out maybe a solution to a big problem that I can then address later on. So I think that was sort of some of the things that they saw some potential in this, in this project. So sort of taking ideas and concepts from other fields and putting it into a new one and to develop something new. So I think that's why they sort of found this project quite interesting. Okay, so I had a project, I had some ideas to put the things together. What I also need to say that is that before doing, like writing this grant, I was actually working with a larger group on a bigger project application. And it was in working with this bigger project application that we sort of came to talk about, well, wouldn't it be nice if I also got some funding for myself to work on something that is sort of closely related to this project? So that was sort of that. And then I took sort of the big project idea, some of the ideas, and put that into my own project as well. But part of this bigger project was a collaborator from the University of Copenhagen, which is on this grant. And then I made the connection to Cambridge sort of independently of that. So that was sort of just the initiation of it. I started in good time because we were working on this project for this bigger grant idea for a while before. So I started earlier, and I started with, well, what as a researcher am I interested in, and what do I want to work with in the future? So sort of combining different things, but figuring out what you want and also what you need to learn. So you've done something during your PhD, and for me, I really wanted to do something else, learn something new. So not doing the same thing as I did in my PhD, but really learn something new. And I also think because my background wasn't in metabolomics, but I think in this grant, if you have also the right team around you, can show that you can sort of, you have the surroundings to learn what you need to learn, and you have some skills in a field that is close to, but not exactly the same. I think that also was sort of why that I could get this grant without having done anything specifically in metabolomics. Finding the right team around you, that's really good, and it is an opportunity. And I think it's a good advice, and I'll also give it here that Maria said that there's an opportunity also to say, well, if you go to someone and say, hey, I have this idea, I want to work with you, and I want to raise money for me to get to work with you. I think that's more or less a really good sort of starting point for working with someone you want to work with, because it's also a little bit of a gift to them to get someone to work on an interesting project with them, but you just have your own money with them. So I think that's a really, really nice way. Another thing, sort of a little bit of an advice, so I got and I use for this grant, and I've done for others as well, sort of when you read your application through, when you're doing it and sort of writing, then you need to sort of step a little bit aside and then go back and read it more as a reviewer, try to see some of the limitations in the project, because then in your application, you could write, it doesn't have to be long, but just, well, actually, we know this is a little bit of a limitation, but I will address this in this way. So you sort of know or think about what could be some of the counter arguments for your project, and then you address them already in the application. That was one thing. For instance, in this project with these metabolites as intermediates, I was thinking, well, we're just doing it in one cohort, but it would be good with some external validation. So I added that part sort of after reading that. And then I don't know all myself, but I think I had some nice figures that sort of said a lot, so I could use some space more in the application as well to describe some other things. So I think that's also helpful for other people to understand what the project is about. Yes. So some of the final learnings here, so to wrap it up, well, I think about what you want to learn and what you need to learn to sort of, for you to take the next step in your career. I think this grant is really set up for this. It's a good opportunity. You have to be really clear about the international aspect in the grant. It's an international postdoc, so you have to really show that you will come and you will work there and you will sort of also be integrated in that environment. Finding a good team is really important. And have a big project is good, but you have to remember that you also have to do it if you get the money. So sort of have it big and then maybe turn it down a little bit, because yeah, that is just speaking from experience, that the more things you add, then it also gets to be more complicated. So it's a fine balance. So yes, this was a good experience for me. You can see me here sitting in the office in Cambridge, and this is well, I could end on this, right? But actually going abroad, it's a really big experience. And I will just say that, well, actually, there was so much more to it. So we just had like this amazing time. And I guess some of the days they were tough. You can see there's a picture of my son lying in the hallway going in. He couldn't make it any further. And I also felt like that some days with this, but there was also a lot of great time. So yeah, so happy to take any questions.
Thank you a lot. And there's already one question from Karina. I can read it up. Thanks for a nice presentation. About the timing, do you think that it is acceptable by DFF 1 year in Denmark followed by 1 year abroad, or should it be other way around, first 1 year abroad and then 1 year in Denmark?
I think they are flexible with that, and I think you can actually do like 6 months away back in Denmark and 6 months away again. I can't remember exactly if they have something you have to start abroad. I actually don't think so. You just to have in the 2 years, you have to have a minimum of 1 year away, and longer periods like 6 months and that. And they want you to stay even longer than 1 year.
Okay.
Preferably.
Another question from Rana. Would you think it is okay to stay 1 year in Denmark in the same group as you did the PhD? Or is there a requirement of changing research environment also here in Denmark?
I think that depends on the project. I think what you need to show is that you are growing independent of where you did your PhD. So you need to show that. If you can still have a connection, I still have a connection to the Department of Public Health where I did my PhD. That I still have that in this project as well. But I just have a lot of other collaborators as well, and actually spend most of my time with them. So I think that's okay, but you need to detach yourself in one way from it as well.
Okay, then there's a question from Eloire, perhaps. Does this grant also apply to more theoretical projects in physics, for example?
Yeah, I think the Independent Research Fund Denmark, they are actually very broad in their sort of scientific scope. I can't remember if you have to then apply for sort of through a specific, they have these overall sort of themes, but it is like for all research.
Do you know something about the success ratio, Daniel? How is the success ratio? How many applications do they receive, and how many grants do they give?
That's a good question. I actually don't know, but I heard it's very competitive because you are competing across fields.
Yeah. Okay. So Gretchen, you have a question, I can see.
Yeah, I do. Thanks so much, Daniel. Another super good talk and lots of interesting and good tips for people. One of the things that struck me when you were talking on one of your last points about make it a big project, but be careful because you have to do it. One of the things that popped into my head, and this is either for you or Maria or both of you to answer, is what is the reporting like? So once you get the grant, what are your responsibilities in the years that you have the grant to report either a financial report or a progress report back to the funding agency?
Yeah, so for my grant, well, depending on how you also structure your time, then you have to do like after 1 year, you have to make it's 2 years. So after the first year, you have to do like a budget for the first year. And then at the end you have to do like a final accounting. I guess it is. It's not a budget. It's accounting. So you have to do that. That's one reporting, and then at the end of the project you also have like a final report of what you did. So that's what the reporting that there was in my project.
That doesn't sound too heavy. That sounds a bit on the lighter side.
No, but I will say the financial stuff is still tricky.
Yeah.
So note that I said that it's actually a personal grant.
Yeah.
So there are
Very
different
much.
ways of handling that.
I
So
have a
you
question.
can what?
Yeah, I have a question in relation to that, because will you also, when it is a personal grant, will you also then be met by, if you are going to the Cambridge University, there's some running costs related to that, and you have to negotiate with your funding. So it's if they say it's at least 5%, or then you can say, oh, I only have this kind of money, so it will only be 2%, or how does that work?
Yeah, so for me going to Cambridge, well, they had a bench fee and I had to pay that. And that was sort of the arrangement there.
Okay.
And I also made a special arrangement with so I was hired through the Department of Public Health at Aarhus University for the other part. So I ended up, because, well, I could get all the money for myself, and then I had to administer everything and probably get someone to do the accounting. But you could get when you are away, the away institution to administer that part of the grant when you're away. So I got them to do that, and then I became employed by the University of Cambridge, sort of through that, and then I could through them administer that part of the grant. And then when I was in Denmark, I made an arrangement with that department that they could help me administer that part of the grant. So I didn't have to do that, but still sort of ending up on me doing many of the things. But I hope in the end here that it will save me or doing all of that accounting, because you have to have like a person, like a accountant from the outside, sort of going through your economy and saying that it's okay. So that is,
and you will pay for that as well.
That's a part of that.
Okay.
I think it's interesting because it's pushing you more and more towards independence too, not just scientific independence, but also these kind of independence
Administratively
things.
as well.
Administrative independence.
But it is, there are many ways of doing it with this grant. And
Maria, do you have reporting responsibilities?
Yeah, so it's an NNF grant, and I think for all NNF grants, they use research fish. So I have to report once a year. And then besides that, my budget were taken care of by the Danish institutions. So whatever I have put in for lab expenses and stuff like that was then transferred to, in my case, Colombia, and then handled through there. And then I kept the rest in Denmark. And for instance, going to conferences, I used the Danish system to book tickets and so on. They gave me a MasterCard to use for any of these purchases, or if I want to buy a computer, or what I else have allocated in the budget. And then finally, when it was done, when it ended the 4th year, they had to, Denmark reported to the US or the other way around. US reported what they have used on the budget back to Denmark, and then they reported back to NNF.
So, Penny, I'm just curious. So when the funding was personal, could you also set your salary by yourself?
No, sorry.
No, yeah, but I think I guess you could, but the thing with this grant is that you have like this amount of, at least the DFF independent, they have like a set amount that's sort of what you get. Then you use probably some for salary, and then something for rest of things that are relevant to your project.
Yeah. And is there something, is there a rule, if you get funding from other sources, then you have to reduce the funding you have from the independent research fund, or is it just acceptable to you go out and find more funding for, it can of course not be for salary, but for the additional cost, or how is it working?
Yeah, I think that could work if you had said that we have this much, but we actually need all of this rest, and we will get that from another source. That would work.
Yeah.
Of course, you can't get double funding. So if you're doing this, and then you just get to do more of it. So yeah, that is possible. And actually, in my grant where I have this pilot study, I had like, okay, there is enough for me to sort of complete 10 people, and then we will try to get money to complete more people from other sources. Yeah.
Okay, there's a question for both of you, Daniel and Maria. Is the salary adapted to the country you stay abroad, e.g. as outside of Denmark?
In my case, it's to the Danish research institution, so it will be a Danish postdoc salary.
Yeah, and for me, there was a little bit of an issue because the postdoc salary in Cambridge is a little bit different in Denmark. So, but we sort of made an arrangement that I should get the salary I should have gotten in Denmark, but little bit changed to the UK system. So I think they had to give me another title than a postdoc because, yeah. But they made that fit. But I think you have to talk with the institution about if they can do that.
Okay. A final question. Is anyone who will raise a final question? Otherwise, I will just share my screen here. So just to say that the 22nd of November, we will have the next webinar. It's a webinar on grants for establishing an independent research group. It will be the same time, 3 o'clock. And just one moment. And then just to mention that we have 2 open calls right now, 2 cross-academy PhD scholarships. So if you have a mentor in your stomach, then you should look for this. And if you have a talented master student that are looking for quite nice grants opportunities, then I think you should look at these 2 grants. And we'll be happy to answer any questions that will be related to this. You can just email us and then we will answer your questions. But then I will say huge thank you to Maria and Daniel for taking your time and giving your presentations on how it was to obtain or receive an international grant. And thanks for Gretchen and Pernille for organizing the grant webinar series. And then thanks to the audience for being here and for raise important questions. Thanks a lot and take care.